Welcome to Tales and Ales on Loudoun Now Voice. I'm Rince Green, and today Brian Tinsman tells us the story of growing up homeschooling and how that conversation changed in 2020 when everybody turned into a homeschooler.
Imagine being completely focused for a moment and then hearing the words, "I think they're Amish." You know, that's one of those things that no matter how focused you are, you hear something like that, your focus is broken. You think, I wonder if they are Amish. Who? No Amish people here tonight, right? Okay, cool. No, it's not an Amish joke. There I was. It was about 1997. There I was wearing an 80s tracksuit, hand-me-down, 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 hand-me-down. And, the nice geometric neon patterns, makes a swish when you walk. Walkman headphones, plugged into my pocket. I was in an exhibit hall, and I was watching Fabergé egg exhibits, like you do when you're 8. I think they're Amish. So I did one of these. No Amish people over there. No Amish people over here. Nothing really in my periphery. So you turn until you see the source of the person who said, I think they're Amish. You realize that they're looking at me. And that was the first time that I realized that homeschoolers are kind of misunderstood. Where are my homeschoolers tonight? Yeah. All right, so you get me. We'll have therapy after this. So let's go back to the beginning. I grew up in southern Delaware. You guys have been to the beaches, right? Tax-free shopping? Okay, I lived in one of the fields that you drive past very quickly to get to the beach, and then drive very quickly past. In a log cabin in the middle of the woods, surrounded by cornfields. That's where I grew up. Southern Delaware is a far cry from Northern Virginia. It's only about 100 miles. You can get there in a day, you can come back, it's a great drive. But there is an ocean of expectations that you cross with the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, okay? In Sussex County, where I grew up, the median household income is about 1/3 of what it is in Loudoun County. So is the reading proficiency. So is the math. And I don't say, that actually isn't a joke. It is funny, but no, it's not a joke. I say that to say that it is a very different world, and that there's a lot of families that live in these communities, just like here, that it's a lot of good parents trying to do the right thing for their kids. Older siblings, though, not trying to do the right thing for young, impressionable children. I was bullied growing up by my classmates. Voted most likely to take a punch while Mom was on the phone. And I was, yeah. But there were things that they prepared me for in life to make me more of a normie, to give me that experience. They bullied me. I didn't get the bus experience, okay? I didn't get to walk in straight lines. So anytime I did step out of line, there was an elbow in the rib or, a smack on the back of the head, whatever it may be. They tried. Good people. So it was when you left your home and you went out into the world and you met people and you have great conversations. These are your peers. And eventually, that conversation, going so well, would eventually come around to, so where do you go to school? And when you're young, you go, well, I'm homeschooled. And the first thing people do when they hear that is give you one of these. Maybe one of these. Maybe, yeah, I'll be right there. What I'm saying is, the conversation changes because people, again, homeschoolers, misunderstood. So it's a very strange dynamic that as you're growing up, you kind of recognize the patterns here and you go, oh, you start apologizing for things that you should never apologize for. You go, oh, I'm homeschooled, but not like that. Please stay. Then you get the questions. Do you get to sleep all day? I don't know. No? I don't watch The Price is Right. I do work, just I don't know. You go to prom with your mom. Classic. Good one, guys. Fun fact, I actually did go to prom. That is the nice thing when you don't have a social life. Your weekends are free. And if you're kind of tall, you look okay in pictures, acne chic. That nice birth control haircut so that moms know you're safe. You do get invited to prom. I went to 11 proms. Yeah. So just think, right now, across the Eastern Shore, just imagine, there are mantles with nice family pictures. And then there are people's daughters with me. Standing there just like this. Homeschoolers are misunderstood. So my point being, imagine I'm not going to say delight. There's nothing delightful about it. It was a horrible situation, of course. However, in 2020, schools closed. Kids went home. People called Brian. Hey, Brian, how's it going? How's it going, Bob? How are your kids? Well, see, here's the thing. So now, I'm at home with them now, and like, what do you do when you're, homeschooled? I guess this is called now. They're gonna be okay. They're gonna be like you. They're gonna be fine. And that really is the message tonight. So let's go back one second to a little bit more of my upbringing. And again, it always comes down to parents trying to do the right thing for their kids. So my mom was actually a college professor, finished her doctorate in education, and decided that she was going to waste her future on 3 of the most ungrateful little bastards. Sorry, Ashley's mom. And just pour all of herself into them. So shout out to Mom. She couldn't be here tonight, but she is awesome. But the point is, and the thing that she knew, and the thing that I know, and the thing that you'll know now, and the thing that I told everybody on the phone, over Zoom, letters, however I communicated with people, homeschool, letter writing network, the flu network, owls. The thing that you need to know is that if you care enough about your kids to ask if you're going to ruin them, you're asking the right question. And they're going to be okay. The kids are going to be all right. And that's really the thing. And it gives me hope to have these big type of events again, to be able to get back out there, because people are going to recover from everything that's happened in the last 2 years. Doesn't mean it's not going to be easy. And I did make a joke about therapy earlier. Therapy is very important. But therapy is more for your siblings and what they do to you rather than the school choice that you choose for your kids. So whether your kids are public school, homeschool, private school, night school, culinary school, whatever it may be, if you care enough to support them in that school, that's what it's all about. And the last thing I'll say, if this message touches you at all, then support the organizations like Loudoun Education Foundation that support the schools in Loudoun County, because that's what makes these things truly great. And us homeschoolers are going to take our therapy at the bar. Have a good night.
How you doing, Renz? I think I have, I've known you for years and years at this point. I think I've always pronounced your name wrong. I think I say your name with more of a Z than an S. So I'm gonna fix myself there.
I don't think I've ever. Here's the thing. First of all, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce my name, because it's a Dutch name, which I don't speak. Secondly, I think if I got upset about that, I would probably be a serial killer by now. It's not a thing you can worry about.
That's right. You would live upset, and that's not a good way to live. So, yeah.
Brian Tinsman, welcome. Thank you for joining us here on Tales and Nails on Loudoun Now Voice.
Happy to be here, Renz. Thank you.
Now, I would like to, before we even get into the story, I've actually been involved in Tales and Nails for a long time. You're part of putting this thing together, I believe.
So I am I will call myself sort of fan number one. Danielle and I were connected years ago because she was, managing editor of Loudoun Now. And I was working for the county in economic development at the time, so I was in a role that I kind of grew into over time, but had PR connections and things like that. And I'm also one of the top fans of Loudoun Now too. So just because you guys have always covered business news really well, community news really well, and just sort of the intersection of those two things. So had a great opportunity to get to know her, and to know Danielle is to think she's wonderful. So when that call went out on Facebook, and she said, "Hey, I've got an idea," and the whole community kind of stepped up to become part of that. I've never had an official role, but I've been to most of the shows, really, except when my kids were born and very little. And I've had the opportunity to speak now twice. My wife has spoken once. Pounce Solutions, my company, has sponsored them once. And then a couple of my clients that I work with have been long-term sponsors. And some on their own volition, and others through my recommendation. So yes, I'm intertwined with Tails and Nails, but just a very enthusiastic outsider.
I think this is Tails and Nails has been going for 6 or 7 years, I want to say. How long?
That's right.
What year did we start with that?
That's about right. 2017 sticks out in my mind, but that I can't remember exactly again when the idea launched and when the first show happened. And they've gone through their twists and turns, certainly. I remember I have not been to one of the Fairfax shows, but I did go to the one that was in Frederick. And it is interesting how you take the same format, switch out the speakers, it's a different show. Switch out the location, it's a different show. But the constants that remain within that, Danielle, Susan, and the team that they've built around them to kind of be that quality check and that sort of thing. I mean, people still travel for these shows, which is amazing. But what I love is going to those shows and seeing ones where 3/4 of the people raise their hand and say they've never been to one of these before. It's one of those just boutique communities that they've built, but they're always bringing in new people for it. And I think that's there's something special about that. I've always really been drawn to Tails and Nails because of that.
I wasn't really planning to talk that much about Tails and Nails itself here, but
Yeah.
it is a really special, it's sort of an unusual and very special thing we have, really.
Mhm.
There is not another thing you can do. I mean, this seems self-evident, right? There's not another thing you can do on like a Friday or Saturday evening that is like going to Tails and Nails. Like, it is not like going to a movie or going out for drinks or anything else. It really is a pretty special and an unusual evening, I have to say.
It is, yeah. I was actually explaining it to somebody the other day that I was convincing of the value of a sponsorship with Tails and Nails, because again, I just so firmly believe in it. And so we were playing the association game of like, oh, it's like the Moth radio hour or whatever they call that particular show, and I said, sort of. Oh, it's like TEDx, sort of. But it's none of those things, and it's neither. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's not too highbrow. It's not lowbrow. It's not an open mic night, but it's also not these super polished professionals that are up there. It really stays true to what it says it's going to be, which is really just community storytelling. And gosh, I don't even know of other. I have not found a parallel to what they are. I don't know if Danielle would ever franchise that out to other communities, but it seems to me something that could work anywhere. But it works especially well here.
And that makes it work. So, I mean, one of the things I often say, one of the things I like about Tails and Nails is that a lot of storytelling style events, a lot of storytelling generally, just by the conventions of narrative, it's very clean, it's very pat, beginning, middle, end, and the whole thing is wrapped up in a package, right? And that's just not the way that I experience life. I don't think that's the way anyone experiences life. Like, the stories are a little ragged. My stories start, well, okay, I mean, you could go as far back as you like, and I'm still kind of living this story today, right?
Right.
And I think that the storytellers at Tails and Nails are always very good, but they're also always pretty honest. I think they feel like real stories. I'm not going to drag anybody in particular, but I do feel like sometimes some stories are harmed in other venues just by trying to make them too pat, too clean, right? And these are true stories that people of Loudoun County are telling.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the ones that are perfectly tied. You might remember it and associate it with that person. But if you were to ask me just a random story that pops to mind, it was actually during the second time that I presented. It was another gentleman, so I got to see it several times through rehearsals and all of that stuff. But it evolved a little bit from, I think it probably started out as like a 20-minute story, and he got it down to 8 minutes. It was about a blizzard and some time that he paid a guy to shovel his driveway. And, he lives out on 15 near me in Luckett's, and he had like a half-mile long driveway during, one of the like 30-inch snow drifts that we got. And how this guy in a t-shirt, chain smoking a cigarette, managed to plow as much of his driveway as he could. I don't think the story had a point, or got to he just sort of stopped at some point. But it was so funny, especially some of the iterations that I heard along the way, like the hidden details throughout a story like that it's really funny. And it's so human, and it's so fun for that.
That's so funny. This ties closely to a thing we say I don't know if anyone else does in the newsroom a lot, which is sometimes you finish writing a story and sometimes you just stop writing it.
Yes.
And that is, so I think that benefits from that. But I do want to talk about your story, of course. So I guess I'll take it in the order of the story, starting with growing up homeschooling. So have you ever talked to your parents? What made them decide that was the right path for you guys to do homeschooling?
Yeah, so I guess just a little bit about our background. So I'm originally from Southern Delaware, which is, and I do talk about this in my story. It's very different from Northern Virginia. I think I'm 120 miles door to door from where I grew up, but it's, that's a massive difference. Southern Delaware, particularly back in the 80s and 90s, was very agrarian. I describe it as I grew up in a log cabin surrounded by the woods, surrounded by fields, surrounded by nothing, close to the beach. And that's very much what it was. So the public schools at that time in that area were not very good. My mom in the late 90s was wrapping up. She was a college professor for a university in Delaware, and so she was wrapping up her doctorate in education, and I think was just really about to sort of launch into her career in that way, and get on the tenure track and do all the things that you're supposed to do that way, and had that realization that, hey, her own kids, I'm the youngest of three, but her own kids were not having the best educational experience, and for all of the options that exist today, particularly post-COVID, that was a very innovative moment for education. But just the advent of high-speed internet, I think there's a lot more programs that cover everything from unschooling to self-learning to kind of homeschool packages to virtual learning, and all of these different options. They just didn't exist then. And the other thing about Southern Delaware, Northern Delaware up near Philadelphia has quality private schools. And that didn't exist at the time either. There were no charter schools. There were no magnet schools. There were no private schools. You could go to public school or you could homeschool. And so my mom, rightly, she has that problem solving instinct as well, just said, oh, I can figure this out. I can do this. And so all three of us came out at the same time. My older brother was going into he would have going into 7th grade. So he had made the middle school transition. And I think that was probably part of the problem. But he came out in 7th grade. My sister came out in 5th grade. And I came out in 3rd grade. And all three of us, were homeschooled straight through. Now, I think I would ask everybody right now to just sort of pause and imagine what you're imagining. And I can almost guarantee you that's probably not what it looked like. But it's kind of one of those things that I found over time, both while I was in it and really every day since, anytime I mention it. People have hot takes on homeschooling and what it is and what it looks like. And it's represented in pop culture, and there's a kernel of truth to every characterization of something, but it is and should be different for everybody, I think. And if there's anything to kind of take away as an advocate for homeschooling, it's that it can and should be what you want it to be. Because if it's not, then there are much easier ways to learn things.
Well, we'll get ahead to some of this in a minute, but since we are talking about this, and I think a lot of people it's a thing, as you said, a lot of people have heard of, but most of them have not experienced. And indeed, they do have some ideas about it, right? And through some of my work, I've had the great opportunity to work with actually a fair number of homeschoolers, and those have been some of the sharpest folks I've ever worked with. And in fact, a couple of some of the sharpest reporters we've had have been homeschooled, as a matter of fact. So tell me about putting together what does it look like? Tell me about putting together the curriculum for a homeschooler, what it was like for you and your family, how to assemble that educational environment.
Absolutely. And so I think, again, I've sort of referenced that there's a much bigger market for it now. So there are many more programs that you could just wholesale say, we're going to do, whatever that particular track is. I would say, generally speaking, and kind of looking at it around now, that there are relatively inexpensive options. There's lesson plans that are made available. They can be tailored, obviously, to your personal needs, but also by state regulation as well. Education is something that is regulated at kind of every level. So not often at the town level, but almost always at the county level. That's a big chunk of where your personal property tax goes to. At the state level, there's huge tranches of state level funding. And Department of Education at the federal level, at least traditionally over the last 40 years, has had a financial say in a lot of things. And, so there's different breakdowns depending on what community you're in. But I think even at the federal level around here, it's, on average about $2,500 per student. I think locally, Loudoun, don't quote me on this, but it's somewhere in the range of what do they estimate it takes to pay for a student. It's $15,000, $16,000, $17,000, $18,000, $20,000. It's a very expensive thing. Comparing that to homeschooling, you're going to continue paying your taxes anyway. There's no opt out for that, but you can choose any of those programs. For me personally, again, my mom had more of that sort of the educational training on that. That was both what her master's and her doctorate were in. And so, for her, I think she took a lot and modified. And so, it looked a little bit different every day in terms of a day-to-day. We kept to a pretty normal schedule in terms of school. So we would be up at 7, we'd eat breakfast and get dressed. We'd meet at the kitchen table again at 8. And it's interesting. I think maybe one of the biggest jumps that people need to make is that idea of like, my friends would ask me, because most of my friends were not homeschooled. So I had friends who asked me, do you just nap all day? Like, can you just sleep whenever you want? Do you go play? Do you sleep till noon? No, we kept to a pretty tight schedule. My mom knew how to run a classroom. And so she was pretty serious about all that. And so we kept to a tight schedule, and we had generally, sort of days of the week is how the breakdown of that went. So there were some things that we do every day, English and math every day. Science was Tuesdays, philosophy was some other day. And then we had sort of the running projects as well. Both of my parents actually were scientists. And so they really wanted us to love that. Sadly for them, none of us took to science. So bless you, Mom. Appreciate you. I just by the time I got to chemistry, I was like, I got to be done with this. So. Yeah, so it was that was sort of the general flow, and then again, we always looked for opportunities to be out in the community. So I was actually, by the time I was in high school, I was out of the house more than I was in. So whether that was doing sort of college courses at the community college, taking math and English through the University of Delaware, working jobs, I could work hours that other people couldn't. So there was a kind of built-in flexibility to set my own schedule. But there were times when I had 2 or 3 jobs, kind of towards the end. And so you can make it whatever works best for you. And so for that, curriculum becomes really more self-driven over time, I think.
So tell me about, you've had time now to reflect back and probably talk to your family and your siblings about this. What do you think the different impact was on you of being homeschooled versus if you'd been stuck in the, rural Delaware public school system?
Yeah, I think really by the time I was in second grade, I I was a teacher's pet. I'll never forget Mrs. Peden in second grade, who was was the last year that I was in public school. She gave us an assignment to write about an octopus, a book that we had read on octopi. And I've been told that octopi is not actually correct, but I'm not going to take that risk today. So a book on octopi, and write 1 to 2 sentences on it. And I said, I have more to say. And so for several days, while, the rest of the people in the class were catching up on something else, she just let me write about an octopus in the back of the class. And I think my manifesto on an octopus ended up around 8 pages. And she was just like, so like, I never want to say it was not my negative experience in being in that, sort of traditional public school classroom that led to that. And, God bless people like her, because she kind of recognized, okay, I'm just going to let this kid go. And, sure enough, I think that was one of those assignments that hung out in the hall. And so it's, like Johnny's page on an octopus and Annie's page on an octopus, and Brian's was like down to the floor, and they're like, cool. Good for him. So where was I headed with that? I don't know. I think I probably would have, I don't sit still very long. I won't say that I get bored, but I create tasks for myself. And so I hope that would have been for good had I stayed in that environment. But I will say, having not been in that, I think kind of unlocked the whole rest of my life, as you know a little bit about my story. It was interesting kind of coming out of that system. You go into college then. I went to a small private school, so still a lot of flexibility and kind of choose your own adventure there. But you kind of are put back into a system then, more structure. I came out and worked several corporate jobs. I worked in local government, very structured. And it wasn't until, kind of my early 30s again, where this idea of entrepreneurship kind of bubbled up, and it's like, well, you could kind of take away the structure again, and kind of explore that. So I do see, for me, what that impact was. So to know what the alternative universe would be without that, I'm not sure, but I do know that I think I use some of the lessons and kind of that self-guided philosophy that I learned at a very early age. I use that every day. And it's funny, too, because my siblings are not necessarily that way. They're both lawyers. They're both corporate contract lawyers. They love rules. And so not that I have any issue with rules, but I just, I want to look for the creative solution on things. And my brother, who is, one of my best friends, is just a very black and white person, and, really found his way in the legal world. So is it me? Is it, is it nature? Is it nurture? I'm not sure. But I do know that it really trained me to be who I am now.
That's fine. And I do want to get ahead to how everything's coming up Brian in the last 5 years in terms of the homeschooling and thoughts about that. But I do want to go back to that childhood and growing up, because the story starts with you out in public and some folks who don't really seem to know what to make of you and your family. So, just tell me a little bit. You say you're out in public so much, but tell me a little bit more about that, going out into the world and interacting with people. And you talk about finding out that, well, other people don't really understand what you're doing, what your family's doing, and they don't maybe have the best idea of it. So tell me about going out in the world as a young kid who's in homeschool.
Yeah, it's funny because I think, in much the same way people have experienced seeing their teacher in the grocery store and it's jarring. You don't know what you're looking at. We often had that experience where, just baked into your normal life, you would have, you might have a dentist appointment, or maybe we were on the younger end and mom couldn't leave us at home alone. So, part of the homeschool experience is, hey, we're going shopping and we're going to go get groceries, and we'll be out doing sort of the mundane things. And in almost every setting, people would kind of look at us strange, like, why you guys should be in school right now. And that was doubly the case when we went sort of for, like the field trips, essentially, that were really dedicated learning experiences. So I mentioned Southern Delaware, Northern Delaware. Northern Delaware has much more of the arts and, the convention center spaces and different things. And I'll never forget, it was a Fabergé egg exhibit So, the last Russian monarchs had Fabergé eggs, which were essentially just these incredibly ornate eggs, and so it's all sort of built into Russian history and the last czars and Anastasia and all that good stuff. You should look it up if you haven't. But they had a whole exhibit around this, and we would go up to this particular convention center when they had these touring exhibits like that. And for that particular one, we for some reason, I think we were all wearing like 80s neon windbreakers, and so we were not exactly looking like we were in place in 1998 or whatever this was, but hey, whatever. So we were wandering around. We had the headphones on. We're doing the self tour thing, getting the information. And there's this group of private school girls. Again, there's private schools up there. They're on a field trip as well, and they cannot make heads nor tails of what we are. And we don't look like them. We're clearly not another private school. There were no public school groups there that day. So who are these three people in like 80s windbreakers? And so you get to the end of the tape and you can kind of hear what the chatter is going on in the room around you. And this one astute young gal turns to her friends and goes, "I think they're Amish." And that's been just sort of one of those punchlines in my house ever since then. I actually just saw my brother and sister the other day, and we were reminiscing and reliving some of the, just the lines that make us all laugh and fall apart. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny because Dover, Delaware, Lancaster, PA, we're all kind of in that bubble there. There were Amish people around. It's not like they never saw Amish people. Clearly not Amish by attire, by presentation, by activity, any of those things. But it's just it's funny because I think homeschooling is just a jarring idea to some people and they don't know what it is. So I have always kind of done yes, I was homeschooled, but and then kind of let me try to take away your preconceived notion before you run away screaming. No, it's not that bad. But I think my experience was in some ways unique, but maybe something that's a little bit more mainstream now, which is sort of a curious case of COVID and sort of the circumstances that followed there. And I think one of the fundamental differences there is just if you look at the course of a day in any structured environment with a group, just think of any group that you've ever been in. If you finish something first, then what do? You wait. And so homeschooling, it maybe the biggest difference with an individualized education like that is that you don't have to wait. And so if you get really pumped about, Colonial Williamsburg and you're going deep on that, then you're probably going to go really deep. You hope with what you trade off there is that you just got to make sure that you pay attention to things that you're not so interested in too. So, I wish I was better at Spanish. I wish I'd paid a little bit more attention to science, but, statistics was fun. Geometry was fun. I did go deep on some different things. And obviously writing has always been near and dear to me. So it's fun.
That's universal. Both my parents were horticulturalists, and I got a D in horticulture when I was in college. So
you disappointment, Rents.
Yeah, I'm let down on that. So I do want to turn to things, as you say, things have evolved in the world of homeschooling, and the curriculum's available, the education's available, and then things also changed in 2020 when everyone became a homeschool, and people started calling you to say, okay, what am I supposed to do with these kids, and how do I help these kids keep learning? So tell me about that. I mean, what happened? People just started calling you out of nowhere? What kind of conversations did you have? 2020 must have been a strange time.
Yeah, it was interesting. I went to a small college, so I had a kind of a tight-knit group of friends, and we did a lot of ball busting. And so you take all of the easy little low-hanging fruit. And so I heard homeschooling jokes until I graduated college. And it was funny. Those people can reach out to me for anything, anytime. And they started to about, maybe April of 2020 that, hey, we're all, school's closed. We're doing remote education. We're doing Zoom calls. We're doing different things like that. Or, a number of families went through that and it didn't work. So maybe even by the end of that 2020 school year, certainly headed into the next one, they're making different decisions for their family. And so some of them were taking their kids out for a year, really trying to make this work. And again, there's no real framework for it. Even this thing that you had sort of used as the butt of your jokes for a while. It's a mindset. And it's, I think one of the, I referenced before, that the people would ask if I took naps or, got to sleep all day and work in my pajamas or anything else. But people really don't know what the structure of that looks like and what the cooperation looks like. I know my mom would always say, hey, this wouldn't work if they didn't cooperate, because you can't individualize education and then go force people to do it. So we'd all gather at the kitchen table in the beginning and but kind of go off to our separate rooms and workspaces and come back at different times to do different things. But, we were on a schedule, but there was a lot of it that if you went up to your room and played with Legos or did take a nap, you wouldn't get anything done, and this just would not work. So there was a lot of kind of structure questions like that. Either my kid is doing Zoom school right now, or is, we're trying to make this work. How did you do it? Where do we look for curriculum? Do I try to keep my kid on a schedule? There was also, it was, and there's not a clear answer for any of that, because as you mentioned, this is individualized education at that point. I think people take for granted that whatever is comfortable and familiar and is just sort of the most prevalent option is necessarily the best thing. And so when you actually have to think about it for the first time, and it's not just, oh, my kid needs to be in this place at this time and everything else just happens, when you actually kind of break down the components of it, it's a little complicated. It's no different than setting up, maybe your own meeting schedule throughout the day of all the things that you need to do and the work, the desk work that needs to get done. All of a sudden you have to manage that for a 7-year-old. That's crazy. So, so, during those conversations, it was a lot of like, sort of the casual, curious text of like, hey, kind of seems like this is a little bit like homeschooling. But if they were just there to set me up for another punchline, that was fine. But if they actually wanted advice, I did get to work with a few folks to just point them in the right direction on resources. And, I don't know that any of them really loved it and kind of stuck to it. But I do know that there were huge population shifts towards homeschooling. I think we saw that there are people who can talk about the macro more than I can, of course, but folks that were, again, either had specialized needs in one way or another, physical, mental, or neurological. There were folks that, just found that they could manage things as a family better in that environment. But it's a big lift, as we know, living in Loudoun County, high income community, but a lot of dual parents working and stuff like that. There's sacrifice that comes with homeschooling. And that was certainly true for my mom. And it doesn't mean that you can't work, but you have different priorities. What work looks like is different for the whole family. So it's a family decision for sure.
Have you found that, your college friends and the folks that have ribbed you about this for so long, now that they've actually had to live through it, has that changed the way that they talk to you about it? Or they get a little perspective on it?
Definitely. They make fun of me for other reasons now. But they, I think it was eye-opening for everyone. And I do think one of the interesting narratives to come out of COVID. So, if you can kind of put yourself back in that mindset, there was a lot of excitement about the idea of remote learning, virtual learning, and that petered out. I understand that was that's not a great way to manage, a classroom size group. And I think it failed for a lot of reasons for a lot of people. But I don't think it failed everyone, and I don't think it's a failure. Again, I actually just think that for every individual, I think every group of people breaks down into the individual level. And, I'm not a rabid individualist in that way, but, there are pieces of things that you can kind of learn from that. I've had the opportunity in teaching, the Young Entrepreneurs Academy through the Chamber and stuff like that. When we've been virtual, it does feel disconnected. I get that. I totally get that. But there might be people and formats and tweaks to the system that do work. So this idea that, hey, remote learning failed, as a public school model, taking what you have and turning that into a virtual environment, yeah, not effective for everyone. But I always think it's interesting to kind of test these things out. And I do know that even though I don't think my friends really followed through, it was not a good fit for their family and the way that they operate. I do think for a lot of communities it was, and it has been interesting to see some of those trend lines over time. So yeah, they make fun of me for other things though.
Well, I mean, naturally, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
They're college
A lot of
friends.
material here.
Yeah. So, and now you and your family have decided to homeschool your children as well. You've decided that this was going to be right for your family. So how did you make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying it out. And I think that's the mindset that anyone going into it should have, is that, my kids are young. I have a 5-year-old, so he's going into kindergarten this year. And last year we did pre-K. He went to Destiny School of the Arts in Leesburg. It's great. Loved it. He really enjoyed the social elements of it. But again, what does he need now? What's going to be best for him? And I think just looking at our family, we're blessed to have some really good resources in terms of flexibility. I work from home. I'm working most of the day, but even just that, being able to come upstairs, and I work in the basement, and be able to come upstairs, socialize, answer some questions, do a quick adventure, put a kid down for a nap. That's sort of, that flexibility is baked into my life in a way that other people don't have. Kate, my wife, is amazing. She also has done a tails nails. That's very interesting, sort of about the formation of our family. So you can get to know her as well. But she's got that. We're welcoming our third kid this year, so there's going to be massive disruption to everything anyway. I think that there is the ability, if we try certain things, to see if it works. And again, that social element of it, my son loved that. He has those friends now. We can do play dates. We can go out in the community. It's not an academically rigorous need at the kindergarten age. We want to keep moving forward, but he loves all that stuff, and he's actually taken to it on his own. He did workbooks all summer because that's what he loves, and is really excited about. So he's a lefty. That's probably the most wonky thing. I got to learn how to teach him to do things left-handed, but he's working on his penmanship. He loves numbers and basic math. And one of the things that I had as a kid, just thinking outside the classroom a little bit, and I think we're starting to see more of the connections between this and mental health and physical education and all that, is that, again, I grew up in a log cabin surrounded by trees. I spent a lot of time out in the woods with forts and thinking about things and imagination and wayfinding and learning mushrooms and leaf identification and everything else. I think you got to learn in your world too. And again, we live out in Luckett's. We have that around us. We have the animal park that my kids love to go to. We have all of the parks, all the farms, all of the things to do and try. We live in such an amazing community that can exist outside of just when you're available in the evenings or the weekends. All of the businesses and experiences that you guys enjoy in Loudoun County continue to exist and are often open during the week. So it's an exciting time just to be able to figure out what that looks like and see if it works. I don't think that we are putting our oldest or any of our kids into the box to say this will be the plan all the way through. I know a great many people who have homeschooled and then send their kids to a private school for high school or anything else. So there's lots of options out there, and it's kind of an exciting time to try. My wife is a product of public education. She had the things that she loved and the things that she didn't love. Again, my mother-in-law lives not too far from us and is a early childhood development specialist. My mom is, still has her doctorate in education. So it's a community perspective. It's a family decision. And I think it's an interesting thing to try. So we're excited to give it a shot.
The school year is just starting as we record this. So good luck.
Yeah, exactly. They're working day by day to figure out the schedule right now, and all that good stuff. And again, my life kind of hinges as the being able to plug in as needed. I always laugh because you can kind of see it's, it's a finished basement, but we have hardwood floors up there, and this is the runway right over my head of
Yeah.
of the thundering feet, the when things with wheels should not be in the house, but they are. It's a scooter or a bike, zooming by over my head. And there are times when I'm working diligently or I'm on a call. Thank goodness for background noise canceling. But I hear the thundering of feet of two of my kids, and then a thud, and I always pause and I'm like, that'll be fine. Or 1 second, I gotta go. So it's it's not really different from that. And like I said, school starts out on kind of a condensed schedule in terms of the rigorous academic part. But I think what I want most from my kids, regardless of what system of education they go through, is just be curious, be a lifelong learner, learn how to learn, and learn how to go after the things that that really excite you and kind of spark that joy in you. Because that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's what life is really about.
Well, I think those are great closing words. But before I let you go, and is there anything else that we should be talking about that I'm not bringing up? You want to make sure we talk about this discussion?
No, I think tying it back to kind of what made that story funny with Tails and Nails is that there's just a lot of preconceived notions out there. Humans sort things into boxes, and so they see one example of something over here, and I will say that the people who are funniest about homeschooling are the people who were homeschooled. Sort of that self-aware, they know the stereotypes. But hey, let's just keep in mind, homeschoolers win the National Spelling Bee almost every year. And, you probably need, you need somebody who really knows everything about James Polk. And that there's some homeschool kid out there who knows more about James Polk than any of you do. So, you learn from that kid.
That's quite a specific poll. Are you the guy who knows everything about James Polk?
I don't. I was trying to think of the most random president. And I defy anyone listening to this to tell me about James Polk. So put it in the comments.
Big Garfield heads over here.
That's right. Yeah. So, hey, listen, we're humans. We're creatures who sort things. But, if you do run into people who are homeschooling, I think particularly in 2025, they are doing it for any number of reasons. And hey, it might work, it might not, but isn't that true for everyone?
Well, Brian Tinsman, thank you so much for joining us to tell us a little bit more about your story here on Tales and Ales on Loudoun Now Voice.
Thanks, Rents. And like I said, #1 fan club for Loudoun Now and Tales and Ales. So keep doing what you're doing. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you. We're a big fan of your work too, man.